Greetings sailors and welcome to a Patreon replay, and this time we have something that's quite low tier. This is Martin Luden's in the Kuma, which is the tier 4 Japanese light cruiser. And I have to say, I don't know if you noticed, but the fact that this is a top tier 4 game that doesn't have double carriers, in fact that doesn't have any carriers at all, seems like an incredible rarity to me. Now, Martin here is... it always gets confusing because Martin Luden's is their username, but not their actual name. So, yeah, anyway, I'm just going to call them Martin, even though that's not their name, and that's confusing me now, because I know what their name actually is. Anyway, yeah, they were playing this for the 5 epochs of the Navy event, as I'm sure many people will have revisited lower tiers and discovered the delights of tier 4 carriers. And I'm actually planning to do a video on the subject. I don't know whether CCs have complained bitterly about it in the past, and certainly continue to complain about it on Discord. And yeah, having now finally gotten round to doing the Epoch campaign, yeah, my word, it's quite bad, isn't it? The absolute majority of the games I've played in tier 3s and tier 4s have had carriers. If you get lucky and you play a tier 3, then you might get a game that doesn't have any carriers, but I think every single tier 4 game I've had has had at least one carrier, and most of them have had 2 carriers. And some of the tier 3 and tier 4 ships have literally no AA at all to speak of, so yeah, it's kind of bad. I mean, maybe not quite as bad as it once was with the old carriers, but it's still pretty bad. Anyway, I'd better save that ranting for the actual video though. Let's just enjoy this sight of tier 4 with no carriers. So he's already taken out one ship, which is quite nice. In fact, that was the first blood, although it hasn't shown up in game. And he's now working away at this Charleston, and he has to be a bit careful here because he is being targeted by multiple other ships, and this thing is pretty damn flimsy. It's reasonably fast. It's got an okay amount of firepower. I mean, it's these single 140mm mounts, and because they're 140mm, they're not particularly punchy, but they're generally a bit faster firing than the 6-inch guns, the 152mm and 150mm you find on other ships of this tier. So yeah, the firepower overall is actually pretty reasonable on the Kuma. It's not a bad tier 4 cruiser at all. It trades any survivability it might have for speed, but I mean, in terms of the tier 4 cruisers, there aren't really a lot that do have any level of survivability. Still, the best tier 4 cruiser in my eyes is the Phoenix by far. Just the amount of range it gets is a bit silly for tier 4, let's face it, but it's also a very, very fragile ship, and it's quite easy to delete at basically every angle, a feature that's wonderfully carried over into the Omaha as well. Anyway, so we know there's a destroyer ahead of us, and it is Romulus, which I think that's the European, isn't it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the European one. And therefore has fast but low damage torpedoes. Luden's also has... I don't know, Martin, the guy that we're watching, it just confuses me so much. I don't know why it does what it does. Yeah, he's got hydro running and catches them being dropped, but it's fairly close range, so he manages to eat one anyway. But yeah, this Romulus basically has no escape plan at this point. I mean, the chances of him dev striking the Kuma at this close range, at this angle, if Martin had come around the island broadside, maybe even with those torpedoes, you know, they're low damage, but this doesn't have a lot of health, so that would have been enough, but no, it just wasn't possible. So that was definitely a failed ambush, especially as Martin went into that knowing that they were there. So he's going to drop torps now, which is a nice feature of this ship. It gets actually pretty long-range torps for a tier 4 cruiser, although only 2 sets of 2, but that does mean at least that they reload pretty quickly. Actually, I haven't said that, it's actually 4 sets of 2, it's 2 per side. But if you're trying to turn to make drops of both sides against somebody to kill them with torps, it's a bit too fragile for that. These are more of a fire and forget weapon, I think. But, you know, they are still useful sometimes. You cannot discount Kuma's torps. So there we go, there's the middle capped. The north is looking a bit dicey. There's only 2 ships up there and 3 enemy ships. So they do have the cap, but... we have the cap, rather. This team has the cap. But that might not last. The bulk of both teams seems to have come down to this end of the map, though. So this is where most of the action is occurring. And so far, they've got all 3 cap circles, but they're not that far ahead on points. I mean, I suppose it is still relatively early in the game, but yeah, there hasn't been a lot of trading so far. In fact, only 2 of the enemy team have died, and it's both been kills by Martin here. Now this, Yubari, I am not sure what they were thinking, and it's, you know, with this higher health, it's really not going to pay off. It's actually the Giussiano that gets the kill there, but if he'd had another second, that might have been Martin's kill. He was also trying some AP there, but I don't think this 140 mil AP is particularly effective. I think you're much better off sticking with the HE, generally speaking. For the next target, we have this, I don't even want to try and pronounce that, the Soviet low-tier battleship. That's the tier 3, right? Yeah, Gangut's the tier 4, so that's the tier 3. The Suvorov, I think. And so, tier 3 battleship, not that much of a worry, but yeah, they're still quite big guns, and the Kuma still doesn't have a lot of armour. So it could potentially be nasty, but as it is, he's being completely ignored by this guy. And it's at this point Martin actually turns his attention north, because as expected, those couple of ships have been killed. What isn't expected is, however, the torps he dropped out got the killing blow on the Suvorov, and he must have taken damage from elsewhere. Maybe the Giussiano put out torps as well, but yeah, that was I think something he wasn't expecting to get necessarily. Those were kind of fire and forget torps for sure. So yeah, that was a nice little bonus kill. Now, although the ships up here obviously did tackle the 2 friendlies without losses, they did take damage in the process. So yeah, we know that cruiser is low health, and as we've just briefly spotted, the Shenyang has very low health as well, and the South Carolina also not super healthy, but healthy enough to potentially cause problems. If you're trying to whittle down a battleship alone with this thing, you'd better pray for some good RNG, because it doesn't particularly have the wherewithal to withstand hits for a very long time. You have no armor. You know, I know I've said this already, but it really is papery thin. And unlike the Phoenix, you just don't particularly have the range to get away with dancing around spamming HE at battleships as well. But at least it's better off than, say, the Karlsruhe, which doesn't have speed, armour or range especially. I mean, the range is not bad on the Karlsruhe, but yeah, it is not a particularly great ship. It was one of the low-tier cruisers that I remember really not liking when I first played through it, and I fairly recently rebought it just on a whim, because why not? And realised I wasn't that wrong about it. It wasn't one that I was looking back at and, you know, hating because I was a worse player and not really knowing what to do. No, the Karlsruhe is just not very good. Anyway, we've just about won this one. The team to the south has been doing alright, and maybe he could have done a bit more damage if he had himself continued to the south, but it also would have potentially been heading into the fire of a lot more ships, although also it would have been spread out a lot around a lot more allies. But having come north, well, he's actually managed to then secure himself some more kills, and if he gets this Taranto, there we go, he's got himself a Kraken. And a Confederate as well, because he doesn't need that much damage at this tier to actually get a Confederate. So that just leaves the South Carolina, but we are very nearly out of points, and he maybe could have had time to push round north, but instead he's reversed to maybe get a couple of sneaky shots before the game ends. And yeah, played the safer course of action and definitely survived. If he'd pushed round out into the open, it might have done a little bit more damage, but he also quite possibly would have been sunk if the South Carolina had been lucky enough. So 54k damage, not terrible, but I think it's the 5 kills that's the outstanding thing there, and also 1500 base XP compared to the next best, which was the Giuliano with 87 and 9. Yeah, that's how you say numbers. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it's nice to see a low tier squashy ship doing well. I don't get to show off the low tiers all that often, and it's always a tricky thing really, because it's either somebody seal clubbing or it's kind of a newer player and a bit derpy, but you know, they've gotten lucky or a good set of circumstances, or they've managed to pull off something nice. So yeah, they're kind of a bit harder to commentate really. And honestly, it would be nicer overall if one could more consistently play the lower tiers, but there's such a hard cap on the possibility of having fun when double carriers are such a common occurrence at tier 4. So yeah, despite there being some nice ships down around tier 3, tier 4, the desire to play them, I think for most people, just isn't there unless there's an incentive like either regrinding a line or obviously the Epoch campaign. And hell, if you're regrinding, I know like probably a lot of people, just free XP through to tier 5, so you don't have to deal with that. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this replay, and if you did, you can do all the usual things underneath it, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.